Good Thursday to you, everybody. Income 651. Welcome week. Boom. 7. We are nearing the halfway point. About 8. Good job. How's everybody doing this morning? This week? Well, apologies. This video normally goes up on Wednesday. Just a crazy day yesterday. So let's get things started, right? Delicious. What do we have here this morning? Yes, Great Smoky Mountains. Wonderful national park, most visited national park in the United States. Well worth your time if you've never been. Interesting topography, especially when you hike up into the Smoky Mountains. All right, so enough about our nation's natural wonders. Let's get to your work. Okay, so for this week, we are again delving into issues concerning ethics. So you'll read chapter 7 in Stacks and Scott. Because it may seem to you that we've been sort of hitting ethics heavy, and we have. Because once you get your hands around the nuts and bolts of the data-driven aspect of PR, and a lot of it is data-driven. And by the way, this applies across the board in a lot of fields. So whether it's PR or social media or marketing, public communication, so much of it now is data driven. All right. And once you get your hands around the process of how the data works, it really comes down to, well, what do you do with the data? And is how you're presenting the data and how you're handling the data ethical? And not just in we're not inferring that there's all sorts of nefarious things going on. Whoa, not everybody is Edward Bernays, but you can do things that aren't ethical just through ignorance or being sloppy. And as future practitioners of strategic communication, and perhaps one day as instructors in a variety of capacities in which you're training the next generation in this craft, because that's how I think of communication. It's a craft. It's important that you know what we should and shouldn't be doing as practitioners of this craft, and it's important that you know what should and shouldn't be done when you see it, and that we say, hey, not ethical. So do that. Okay. Also, continue to work on phase 2 of your PR campaign. I have graded, so it's closed, done all of the discussion sections through weeks 1 through 4. And when we hit week 8, I'll do the same thing. Okay. So if you have anything that you need to ask me about that, then, send me an email. Okay. Let's take a look at the questions from last week, see what you said, see what we can add to sort of flesh that out. Question number 1, please explain the difference between descriptive and inferential statistics. How might each best be used in a PR campaign? All right. So what I need you to take away from this question is, number 1, you need to be able to identify what is a descriptive and what is an inferential statistic. So if you saw it somewhere listed on a test and said, here's a statistic which describes blip, you'd go, oh, okay, that's just a descriptive statistic, or that's likely to be an inferential statistic, whatever. And then, of course, you need to have the definition, and the reason that you need this is perhaps one of, maybe not the most abused area in statistics. And remember, as we've said, when I gave you that article on how to lie by the numbers, that statistics, as communication people, we're going to have this inside knowledge. Statistics, which are numbers, are just signifiers. A number is a signifier, like a letter is a signifier. And when you put a string of letters together and you create a word, that's a signifier. When you put a string of numbers together, you create a statistic. That's a signifier. A signifier is a signifier is a signifier. And you can express a truism or you can express a falsity with a signifier. Doesn't matter what the signifier is. Okay. So this area between inferential and descriptive statistics is perhaps the most abused area in stats, because it's, most people don't know that there is such a thing. They say, oh, well, the number's a number, both intentionally and unintentionally. Okay, let's see what you said. Carolyn, let's go with you. You went first. Let's take you first. Stack says descriptive statistics are the reduce and simplification of numbers representing research to ease interpreting the results. Simply describe how the data gathered are distributed within the sample or census observed. Okay, excellent. Let's let's filter that down to a little more basic English. Descriptive statistics, as the name implies, describe only the individuals that you're working with in the, and it's called in the data set, the individuals that you've surveyed, the individuals that you've talked to. If you talk to 20 people, the descriptive statistics concern only those 20 people, or 2,000, or whatever the number is. Okay, they are the numbers that describe that group alone. So inferential statistics, what is that? Well, Carolyn says, by comparison, inferential statistics are statistical analysis that test if the results observed from a sample are indicative of the population, allows us to make judgments whether the results observed in a population generalize to the larger population. Excellent. As the name implies, inferential means you can infer it to everybody else in the population that is represented by the group, or that the group represents. You know, you can read it frontwards or backwards. So you cannot, for instance, survey 500 men and then infer that that's the opinion of 500 women. You can have descriptive statistics from that 500 men. You can have a descriptive statistics from 500 women. But if you're going to infer this to the general population of all women, and then, you know, you start breaking down by age and you know, ideological orientation, whatever the subject is you're talking about. Okay. All right. The descriptive statistics are really only good to talk about the study group. They're not good to describe what's going on in the general population. Those statistics, inferential statistics, are derived from the tests that you run on the data that you get from the group you're looking at. So the relationship between inferential, I need you to know this, the relationship between descriptive and inferential statistics are: descriptive statistics describe the group that you're dealing with and only the group. Inferential statistics come from the analysis of those descriptive statistics from the tests that you run. Now, depending on how many people in the group and depending on what tests you run, you may, I got an itch on my nose, just won't quit. You may or may not be able to infer your findings to the general population. And this is where people get themselves and the public into trouble. Because number one, some just don't know. They poll a bunch of people and they say, well, this is what the people said, therefore this is what is. No. Okay, you can't imply that because 20 people said this, the rest of the nation is going to do. That's the problem with some of these discussion threads, you know, and some of the nastier places on the internet. Fill in a number 4, 8, whatever, Chan, or Reddit. I mean, real nasty stuff. Okay. Part of the thinking, the problem in there is the inference that if someone or some people in a thread says something, this must be true for everybody else. This creeps into the news. You know, how many times do I flip through the news in the morning and I see a headline that goes something like, internet goes crazy, Twitter blows up, you know, as if Twitter was a thing and the internet was a thing, like, you know, like your Uncle Bob, and somehow some percentage, whatever that is, mystery, you don't even get told, of people on Twitter that said this means everybody in the country is after this and is on this or has this opinion. No, they don't. Okay, so that's what the difference is, and that's why it's important that you know these are often misused and abused. That is the difference between the two. All right, question number 2. Referencing the internet, please define and explain the following values produced for many quantitative tests. P-value, R-value, R squared. All right, these are things that you see that pop up when when descriptive statistics are run through tests and they become inferential statistics. Okay, these are the key numbers within inferential statistics that we use after the test to determine whether or not what's going on in the group is representative of what's going on in the population as a whole. Okay, so it's important that you can identify what these things are and what they mean. Lars, let's take you. You went last. P-value. P-value is the probability of getting a test statistic at least extreme as what you observed, assuming the null hypothesis is true. Okay, so yeah, that's true. But what I need everybody to do is to make sure you can translate this into straightforward English. Okay? So if it's already making sense in your head, Lars, that's great. But when you write it out, make sure, and I will ask you on the test, in plain English, explain the p-value. So underneath this, you have researchers often compare it to preset cutoffs like 0.05 to decide whether results are statistically significant. Important cautions: p-values do not tell you the probability of your hypothesis is true. They do not measure the effect size or importance. Okay, all of that's true. Here's what I need you to understand about p-value. First and foremost, I'm writing on my little pad here. We live in a physically predictable world. Okay, so much so that things happen with regularity at a minimum of 95%. We've observed that, and we can count on that over and over and over. So unless something happens outside of the 95% regularity at 5% or above, and this is now in some areas when you're looking at the behavior of some things like pharmaceuticals, that percentage is even smaller. You have a lower percentage of tolerance. And this is called the confidence interval. Confidence interval. So the bare minimum of a confidence interval is 5%. So if whatever you're observing happens 95% of the time or greater, you know that there's no influence on the behavior of the thing. It's like flipping a coin, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. If it comes up a split, let's say you flipped 100 times 5 times. You flip the coin 500 times. Of those 5 times, sets of 100, you would expect that at least 95% of the time, if not higher, in all of the 100 flips, you would have a distribution, a 95% distribution between heads and tails. So maybe one of the 100 flips, you'd get 49 tails and 51 heads. It wouldn't be exactly 50-50. It would be within that 95 percentile range. If it's lower than 95%, you know that something is influencing the flip of the coin. Maybe it's a trick coin. Maybe one side is heavier than the other. Maybe your assistant who's writing down heads or tails when you flip it is making mistakes, and when you say heads, he writes down tails. Something is influencing the outcome, the confidence interval. So when you run a test on descriptive statistics, okay, to see if there's actually any influence of the one variable on the other, the independent to the dependent variable, you look at the p-value. And you can think of p as probability, all right, to help you remember. Okay, next, what is the R value? Lars, an R value usually means Pearson's correlation coefficient, a measure of the strength and direction of a linear relationship between two variables. It ranges from -1 to +1. Good. Okay, now again, I'll ask you on the test to put this into plain English. Okay, so remember what we said when we talked about a hypothesis. A hypothesis has 3 things at a minimum. It has at least 2 variables, an independent and a dependent variable. The hypothesis makes a causal prediction about the relationship between the 2 variables When this happens, and it has a direction, meaning when this happens, this happens, not when this happens, this happens. So for instance, the State of the Union speech was just what, Thursday. Okay, so you could put together a hypothesis that says the longer the president speaks, so that's one variable, the greater the support, registered support, will be for him among potential voters. That's the dependent variable. Now, you could look at a study in which the greater expressed support for the president causes him to speak longer, but you're not interested in that. You're interested in the speaks longer and how that affects support, and whether speaking longer makes support go up or down. The R value tells you if there's a relationship from the direction that you're predicting. If it's positive, it's going in that direction, meaning, yeah, the longer he speaks, this does affect the support. If it was negative, it would be an expression, no, it's going in the other direction. As the support goes up and down, this affects how long he speaks. Okay, that's an R value. So it tells you which way the influence is going between the variables, because sometimes you don't know. And then R squared. Okay, would you say, Lars? R squared is often called coefficient of determination. Is the proportion of variance in the dependent variable that can be predicted, explained by the independent variable. Okay, and that's pretty straightforward. So in our scenario, the independent variable is length of time that president speaks. The dependent variable is expressed support for him among the voters. When you get an R squared value, and these are always in decimals, so you times by 100 to turn both R and R squared, turn them into percentage. The R squared value will give, and it's not exact. It's not like, oh, this number is 100% right. It's probability. So if you get an R squared that comes out to 80%, you could say there's an 80% probability that the longer he speaks, the more popular he becomes. Now, as the R squared value goes up, and when you get up into like the 90 percentiles, then you could say confidently, as someone looking at the data, you could say, like, all of the support that's going up is being driven by how long he speaks, not what he says, not whether people stand or don't stand in the chamber of the House and clap, not, you know, if he trots out a hockey team or a soccer mom or whatever. Nope. It's all being driven by how long he speaks, because the R squared tells us the percentage of what's being caused, support among the electorate, is being caused by the thing that you're studying, him speaking. Okay, if you're not sure about those, please contact me, because they're important for you to know, you know, the difference between the one and the other, and all three for that matter. These are the key three numbers in inferential statistics that you need to be able to keep straight. All right, question number 3, and finally, please explain the difference. You know, I think I look back on it, I think I typed deference. My poor brain. Please explain the difference between parametric and non-parametric inferential statistics. Okay, this one too is important because, you know, here, people misuse the two different kinds of statistics, not because I think they're up to something, but because they just don't understand what they're doing. Okay. And in looking through your answers, you know, I'll tell you what I'm just going to give you a definition. Okay. And so I want to make sure everybody is on board with this definition. And here's what you need to know. Parametric tests, okay, they assume that the data that you're working with is what's called normally distributed. That is, it has a predictable amount of people who are not doing so much, are doing about average, and then are doing the extreme. You know, like let me get my little pad back here again. A normal. There we go. I'm drawing. Here we go. A normally distributed bell curve of data. Right there. Oh, by the way, no beard, eh? Okay. All right. Because when you gather data together, you want to make sure that there's nothing in the data that is really out of line with the behavior of everybody. Okay? So for instance, if you wanted to know how many times 5-year-olds could jump up and down in 30 seconds, and you took 10 of them and you told them to jump up and down, you got them really excited, and then you counted how many times they could jump up and down, and let's say 3 out of the 10, they just thought this was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard. They don't want to jump up and down. You know, you're in their classroom studying their behavior. Why? They want to be sitting at their desk coloring, and 3 of them just go, ain't gonna do it. So you get 7 jumps up and down in 30 seconds, and you get 3 zeros. What happens when you average all those together? That's not a good representation of the average of 10 kids jumping up and down. Now, it might be a good representation of how you motivate kids to jump up and down, because 3 just like, nah, I ain't playing that game. But it's not a good representation of the average time, or the average number of times 10 5-year-olds could jump up and down. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so parametric statistics assume that you don't have any weird behaviors within what you're trying to study. Okay, and so there are types of tests that you run with parametric statistics. Non-parametric statistics, okay, they don't assume that there's a distribution. They don't assume that you know, you have a big, huge data set that is, you've got a lot of numbers. You've got like 10,000 5-year-olds jumping up and down, and you counted how many times each one of them could jump up and down in 30 seconds. No, you don't have that. You have just 10. And so the best types of tests and analysis to do on low number, badly distributed data are non-parametric statistics. And what happens is people take low number of things they've studied, people they've asked, with weird, you know, variations, and then they represent them as if they're big number data sets with big representations, and they are not, and it gives a false impression of what's going on. Okay, so again, if you're like, you know, okay, I'm still not real clear on the difference, okay, Google it, spend a little time with it, and then shoot me an email if you still haven't, you know, got your head wrapped around it. Because these are terms, you know, things like p-value, r-value, r-squared, parametric, non-parametric, you know, independent, dependent variable. These are things that this is just the vocabulary of the data side of the research that goes into all of these different fields of communication, whether it's PR, whether it's marketing, whether it's social media. It's all become data driven now, which is a good thing, because it helps you get a more accurate picture, and therefore a more predictable outcome, and that saves money and saves time, and you know, lets you do more specific work. It's a challenging thing because math, we realize, is a different language than the language that might be intuitive to you as communication craftsman, and that is words. But it's all right, you know. Again, remember, it's all just, you know, try to keep it this way. It's all signifiers, man. Numbers, letters, statistics, words, all signifiers. Try to focus and get down to what does it signify. Don't get hung up on the language. Okay. All right, everybody. Keep up the great work. Okay. I will look forward to your phase 2. All right. If you have any questions, please email me. And otherwise, remember, I think about you, I pray for you, and I will see you on Canvas. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.